Hey everybody. Today we're talking with Joe Biel and Elly Blue from Microcosm Publishing, and they're going to be telling us a little bit about Microcosm, we'll be talking a little bit about kind of the publishing industry, what's been changing, how to connect with readers, all that sort of stuff. So Joe and Elly, if you could go ahead and introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about your journey as both authors and publishers.
You want to go first?
You should go first. Your story
Uh,
begins earlier in
Great.
history.
Oh, that's a good point. That's a very good point. So I was the person in my group of friends who liked the logistics part of publishing more than I liked the creative parts. And I was much better at really looking at like the value proposition of writing while other people were more looking at it from like what they wanted to express. So 28 years ago, I fell into my role as publisher. And then I really kind of pursued that to the ends. I really looked at it from like, how can I learn more about this every day and how can I get better at this? And because of that, for the past 3 years, we were a Publishers Weekly fastest growing publisher. And we still do exactly what we did in the very beginning when I was hanging out at the punk club with all the, you know, kids that were older than I was then, where we're really creating books to change your life and the world around you. And it's kind of incredible how that resonates better today than it really did then, when most people kind of met it with like befuddled amusement. And in that same vein, like I don't have a high school education, so I didn't really think of myself as a writer or an author or anything like that. But what happened was that on the back end, there were times where there were things that people kept asking for, or that, people would come up at events and be like, "Oh, do you have a book about this or that?" And then it gets to the point eventually when you've like read enough books and edited enough books and seen what's successful or not successful. And then, you're kind of like you eventually slowly build up the confidence that you're like, oh, okay, like I could write a book about that. And so, and it's funny because my first book, which is now 25 years old, is like by far my most successful. Like it sold tens of thousands, and it is, continues to be like really well received, in the present. But I've done a lot of things, and sometimes it's like more passion projects, and sometimes it's like something that, I'm doing it because like I really think like there should be a book about the Portland Black Panther Party that you could sit down and read without, having to like untangle every sentence, for example.
So I, like Joe, published zines as a teenager, but then my life took a very different direction. I started writing about bicycling on the internet or trying to do it professionally in like 2008. And quickly my niche kind of became bicycling and feminism. And I was inspired by Joe to start publishing zines, fund them on Kickstarter. And then I ended up starting a feminist bicycle publishing company, Taking the Lane. Learned a lot from Microcosm, and it was only a matter of time before Microcosm and I joined forces. But I was a Microcosm author started, before I became a Microcosm employee. So I was like a colleague and an author and a mentee, really. I wrote a book called Bikeonomics that Microcosm published that did decently well. It's still in print. And then so I kind of got to know their systems, and I was like helping out at events and volunteering essentially with Microcosm for a while before I came on as marketing director and editorial director. And now a lot of my job, the thing that I really loved about publishing zines myself was that like even I found they were even better. Zines and books were even better than publishing on the internet for like creating connections between people and like kind of creating community. That's actually how I met Jessie, is she wrote short stories that I published in my Bikes in Space feminist bicycle science fiction series. Some of the best ones in there are by her, so take a look. And one of the things I love about my work for Microcosm now is that a big part of my job is to kind of like create connections and between people and to build community and to kind of sort of build a sense of like we're all in this together, whether that's like with our colleagues amongst each other or with our authors or with our readers. And yeah, I just love the thing that Joe created. Has like so much inherent potential for that, and just kind of being able to help push it forward is a lot of fun every day. Except the days when it's all tax paperwork. That's less fun.
You've probably had a little bit of that recently, given that we're recording this on April 19th.
Why, yes.
Oh, I wanted to tell you when I was at NorwestCon a couple weekends ago. It's like a local sci-fi convention for people who may not know. And somebody showed up with a stack of Bikes in Space stories or books, anthologies for me to sign. He was like, I brought all the ones that you were in. I was just like, that is so cool.
That is so cool. Like they read them all and they know. And yeah, wow.
And how big is that stack? Like 9 inches.
I was in a lot of the early ones, but I don't think I've submitted anything to the later ones. So it wasn't that big. It
Oh,
was
okay.
maybe like 4 books.
Yeah,
Oh,
I think
okay.
your most recent one is in the Cats one,
Yeah.
which isn't that far long ago. But yes. Well, maybe we'll hear from you again.
Yes, definitely. I keep meaning to. I wanted to ask you both, because you've both been in the industry for a long time. What have you seen change over the past decades? What's stayed the same?
Right. So the biggest change in my time is that, we really saw the fall of the superstore, and we saw, you know, in the 90s, obviously, people really focused on B. Dalton and Walden, and then on Borders and Barnes and Noble. And book development really was catered around those 4 chains. And obviously that is not what we did, and obviously that turned out to be folly because, it's like most of the stores are gone, and they aren't the behemoth that they were anticipated to be. And so in their place, Amazon really ate that market share. And we're sort of seeing the same thing where in the last 4 years, Amazon deplatformed books. And, because they realize they only have so much physical space. The irony, of course, of the like limitless shelf that they have advertised for 20 years is that it was in fact limited. And so they had to say, oh, we can't actually and they've never figured out how to make money from selling books. So they had to cut books because their plan was seemingly to replace books with ebooks. But the consumer had quite a bit to say about that, chiefly in that they preferred paper books to digital. And so we just never saw the global takeover that we were told was going to happen. And then now we've seen the rise of, the independents like control the market again, independent publishers and independent retailers. So it's, now there's we just came back from Winter Institute, which is the show for independent bookstores. They're adding members at an incredible rate because there's so many new stores opening. Stores are a lot more specialized, so we're seeing actually this going to the exact opposite direction of the superstore, where you'll have a store that only sells cookbooks by Black authors, or you'll have a store that only sells, like cozy mysteries, or you'll have a store that like only sells erotica that's like progressive, and that's not something that was anticipated. 15 years ago, we were really like clenching our teeth for the collapse of paper books. And now the greater irony is that, now the biggest problem is there's just too many books in print because of technology. So we went from anticipating the collapse of this to now seeing like 20 to 25 million books in print on any given day. And so you're now having to like compete for that like half inch of shelf space in every store against all those other books. So really clarifying what your book's value proposition is and who it's for and why they care passionately about it and why the store, who functionally has to displace another book to put your book on the shelf, is going to do that. And so these aren't, you could spin that so that's like a terrible narrative, but it's actually been pretty manageable. Like it's, when you make something that people love, they're gonna love it and they're gonna find it. And, it's just a matter of, you don't want to make a career out of like carbon copying somebody else that's more successful than you are. You want to make something that like is genuinely of yourself that people care for.
Yeah.
I
Oh,
oh,
I just want to say I really love that. And I hear that especially like in the indie community, like with like the rise of AI and people just like spitting out books that are, just meant to hit a bunch of tropes and like writing it with AI, editing it with AI, making an AI cover, throwing it up on the internet. And there's just been so much talk in the last couple of years about, okay, really, really digging into what makes you unique, because readers are looking for something unique and they want to connect with like a really, they want to connect with a unique voice and a unique point of view. And that's, almost doubling down on your own weird is the way to find those readers. Well, the way to connect with those readers. It's still hard to find them, and I want to ask you about that later. But Elly, you're about to kind of
oh
add on
yeah,
to.
well, Joe is a tough act to follow, but you kind of both left me a good opening there. I actually wanted to talk about publicity. I actually don't know how much has actually changed in terms of the effectiveness of publicity in the last 10 years, but I feel like at least I'm seeing more and more people in the industry catching up with the idea that publicity actually isn't a good way to sell books anymore. When I first, so 10 years ago, that was before I worked at Microcosm, but I had my own books, I had my own company. I was doing publicity freelance for Microcosm and for a couple other publishers, as well as my own books. And this was kind of like my training was in PR. I could do this, and it was really, really hard to get results, but I could get results. And it seemed like it led to some sales, but not necessarily all the time. Like, I would get some decently high profile national media placements for books, and it wouldn't really move the needle on their sales that much. But it was more of like an honor. And when I was doing it freelance, like the author always seemed to really appreciate it. And I was like, maybe this is the value of it. But just, yeah, over the last 9 years of leading the marketing department at Microcosm, we had a full-time publicist up until like 2019. And then we were like, what if this was a 10-hour-a-week job, if that? And then we just like kind of we had somebody doing it nominally 10 hours a week, but kind of not really doing it for a while. And that didn't seem to affect our sales negatively. In fact, our sales were growing tremendously during that time. So we're back to having somebody do it a few hours a week, but like very targeted towards like, most of our books are sold in stores because of our business model. And that is like our best marketing strategy, is to get our books into stores and to like design them so that they appeal to the right readers. Um, but yeah, the like traditional publicity thing where you like try to get somebody to like write about your book in the media, talk about it on social media, review it in the paper, like that. It's really awesome when it happens, but it's not worth the investment, to be honest. And the narrative I've been hearing for a long time from authors is that publishers, and this is part of the sort of like one of the main things people complain about traditional publishers like us is that we outsource publicity to our authors and they have to pay for it and do it. But like, in fact, we don't do it because it's not a good deal, and we don't recommend that our authors pay for it or really focus on it either. And just all these things that it's kind of like baked into the publishing world that you have to do, like send out review copies and um, build up a social media buzz and get blurbs from other authors. Like all of that is kind of busy work. And I think one thing I've seen in the last 10 years is kind of started to grow, like that has become more and more true as there are more and more books out there and fewer like good outlets for them. But like I'm seeing more acceptance of that. Like we were in a presentation by like one of the major distributors in the country right now, and they said the same thing. They were like, doesn't move the needle. Publicity isn't helping. So that's, I know, not something a lot of people want to hear, but
So for like an individual author who, like you guys do a great job of selling my creative nonfiction, my creative productivity creative books. I wrote them. I should know what they are. But one of the things that I guess I've done to help that is, speaking and being on podcasts and things like that, and trying to connect with people and my readers outside of, you folks just putting them in the store. But what would you recommend for an individual author to like, especially because you publish such weird niche little books? Like how do those authors find their weird niche little people all around the world?
That's sort of like it's its own self-contained, like the solution is in the problem, where somebody that is interested in something will seek out all of the authors that are doing it well. So really the only thing that an author needs to do is to like have a genre, and if they don't want to veer too far outside that genre, they can go a little bit outside of it, but they don't want to go further than their fans will follow them. And then to be prolific within that like relatively defined set of parameters. So if you write space westerns, people would probably read your science fiction, but they're they're not going to go too far if you're writing erotica. At least most of your audience is not going to follow you there. And so think about it in terms of that. And like there's something to say about segmentation too, where not so much thinking about it in terms of like marketing, but know who your audience is, and I mean, we have done a lot of consumer events over these, we did actually more of those in my life than we did of, what are considered like industry events. Like, so we're marketing to the public more than we're marketing to the industry. And I think that's really key too, because, somebody can, you can get placement in 800 Barnes and Noble stores, but those books are very likely going to be returned if there isn't demand for those books, and demand isn't just satisfied by having the book on the shelf, because if they're going to reclaim that space for something else pretty quickly if it's not going. So but by meeting your fans at the event and seeing like who your work is of interest to, and I think a lot of this has to do with my background and like where and how I grew up. But the thing that I didn't anticipate is that most of our fans are young women of color who are like in their 20s, 30s, and now 40s, but it would have been more like in their 20s 20 to 30 years ago. And so, and then that sort of informs like, they're not going to read a book about bow hunting, because that's like outside of their interests, but like they do see
I
them.
can imagine a book about bow hunting that would work, but it's kind of a stretch.
Ooh, all right. Well, we can work on this later today. But so it's like, you think about like what are their interests, and like they see themselves as creative people, like they would read your books because they're like, oh, they like maybe had like a pipe dream to write a novel or, to create something. And a lot of our readers become our authors too in the same way. So it's really like, like understanding what somebody is and is not interested in, and like what their motivations are, and in like a more traditional marketing setting, you would be like, you'd have like a pie chart and a flow chart, and you'd be like, our fans like Mountain Dew and mountain climbing, or whatever. But it's like, so like, but you want to understand that even if you never have to explain it to anybody else, just so like you don't go too far afield. Like we see a lot of authors that they want to write fantasy and other genres that aren't compatible within that. And so they don't understand why like one book sells 100 times what the next one does.
Yeah, and to like add on to what Joe says, like Jesse, honestly, I think you're doing it exactly right. Like, instead of like you have only so much energy to spend getting the word out about your book. So instead of trying to spend it like getting it out there on sort of generic national markets that are a stretch to get to and will reach all sorts of random people, like you're going on podcasts, you're networking, you're at events, you're talking to people that like are interested in the same things that you are, and you're like writing about the things that you're interested in. So it's like, and I just feel like that's kind of the missing piece when a lot of people think about marketing is like it's easy to forget, like, you're doing it for other people who care about it as much as you do. And like you're writing what you write for a reason. It's not to like get a bunch of random people to read it. It's like out of the passion for what you're writing. And I think that's true whether it's fiction or nonfiction. And like anything you can do to sort of like network and build your community, and like that will feed into your writing and your ability to be a productive member of that community, like as much or more than it helps you like sell books. And it also does help sell books. Like often other authors in your genre are the best customers for your books, or at least you can like join forces to reach each other's readers if you have read alikes, and you do that very well in your newsletter. I appreciate you're always kind of like being like, hey, this other person who writes like me, you would like this book too. And yeah, I think that's all super savvy and way better than a sort of spray and pray publicity approach.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the idea that your fellow authors are your not your competition, but your community, I think is such an important one. And it's more sustainable that way, right? I mean, I've been a freelance writer for over a decade, and I've worked a lot of gigs that I didn't care about. And I could only do that for so long. I could only write about forklifts for so long before I'm just like, oh man, this pays so well. I just cannot do it anymore. Sorry, client, I'm firing you. Like, I'm just so bored of forklifts. So yeah, I mean, if you were writing something that's just to make the money, like it's not nearly as sustainable as building a career and a community and focusing on what you're passionate about, because that's what's going to connect with other people. Um,
Yeah.
I wanted to, while I have you here, pick your brains about Kickstarter, because Kickstarter is, I feel like it's becoming even more popular. Like I thought it was popular, and now everybody I know is talking about it. And we've done several Kickstarters for my books, which you have organized. And so I have not actually, I'm going to be doing my own Kickstarter for the first time ever. And I'm like, wow, this is actually a lot of work. So thanks for taking care of that. But yeah, so you've Kickstarted uh, hundreds of books, dozens of books. How many books have you Kickstarted?
Do we have a
Probably,
hard number?
I could look it up. It's probably around 100 by this point. I mean, we've been doing it since 2010.
Yeah, I really thought we were the first book publisher to use Kickstarter, and then it turns out, even despite using it within the first year, we were like the 59th, you know? And
Wow.
so apparently we were not the only early adopter. But, and we used it when it was still in beta, and it was one of those things where, we thought at first this was like a fundraising tool, because, when we had a book that was $18,000 to print, and we were like, wow, that's a lot of shekels. And then, so we thought, okay, like we can just supplement the difference between what our average book costs and what that one costs. And so that was how we did that project. And, we learned a lot since then, where now we have like a three-pronged approach, and we don't see it as fundraising. And I don't know exactly when we made this shift, and I don't remember if this was before Elly's time or after Elly's time, but we now look at it solely as like marketing. Like it's part of a launch strategy, it's part of discovery. And it was around 2016, 2017 where if we didn't launch a book on Kickstarter, people would come up to us at events and be like pick up the book and be like, "Hey, how come I never heard about this one? Like, when did this come out? Like, when was the Kickstarter?" And you're like, "Oh, okay. So like this is important, you know?" And so then we became, believe it or not, more prolific, when we were like, okay, like 12, or I think we were doing like 6 or 8 projects a year at that time. And now I don't know how many we do, like 15 a year or
We did, I
something.
think, 14 the last 13 or 14 the last 2 years. We're cutting back this year because we've started using a pledge manager, which makes it a lot. I don't know. We've cut back for various reasons. It's gotten a little bit harder to fund things on Kickstarter, and that's so interesting to hear what you say, Jessie, about how it's like growing more popular, because they made a couple of pretty bad business missteps during the pandemic, and that has really eroded the amount that we can earn from each project. Like it's building back up, but really slowly.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
There was series of labor issues. There's been, and then that kind of bounced back. Like there was a union drive, which was successful and which we supported. And then, but yeah, it's like it's really the weird thing where like you have this company that literally prints money, and the value proposition of the user, the beneficiary, and the publisher are all aligned. Like we all want the book to be successful, but yet they kind of, I don't know. And very few startups or tech companies are like that, where the proof of concept is immediately established and they don't have to change or do anything, and they could have essentially coasted on this, but they keep trying to like change things, and it has usually been for the worse. So we've kind of tried to offer that feedback and continue to help it grow, because yeah, there's been a few times where we're like, wow, this is a lot of work. And so we've joked that like we should have like a $1 campaign just so people learn about the new book, because that's like really what we're in it for,
Yeah, like
and
our metric for our project success now is like less the dollar amount and more like how many new to us backers do we get?
yeah,
Like
and
funnel.
so it's partly that, and then they're urging us to go the other direction, where they're saying like if you just did one really big project a year that had like a really good news tie-in, and we're like, well, that's not really like what we're in it for. Like we want you to find out about all of the new books that we're making, because that's the one thing about this that's been effective. So, but the advice that I always give publishers is to treat Kickstarter like any other launch strategy. Like think about it like any kind of project launch, where you would say like, how do I tell the people who would care about this that it exists? Where do they hang out? Why do they care? How much are they going to love it? Why do they love it? What are the other books that they love? And in the traditional side of the industry, that's called comparable and competitive titles. When you say like, what are the books that somebody would buy in addition to or instead of this book? And most authors, yes, as you said, like feel competitive about that, but the reality is they should think about that like that person's bookshelf at home contains all of those books, not one or the other of those books. So I usually recommend researching how those books were launched and like where they were reviewed, and who talked about them at what intervals before and during the publication schedule, and to think about it that way.
Yeah, that is all solid advice. I would just add that the sometimes management makes mistakes, but the individuals who work at Kickstarter and their job is to like work with project creators are like sterling top-notch individuals. And I recommend to anyone launching their first project or even their second, third, fourth project, if you haven't already, just like reach out to the humans at Kickstarter and like ask them for advice, ask them for project feedback. And they are really good at what they do and usually really happy to help.
Yeah. And any business organization, nonprofit whose entire board is comprised of lawyers is going to slowly move that mission away from what it set out to achieve in the first place.
Inevitability. I wanted to ask, since you mentioned discovery, what percentage of your backers for any given campaign tend to come from Kickstarter itself as opposed to your own list?
It's a little bit hard to tell because like, you know, Kickstarter will track clicks through any of their newsletters, any of their social media, and anywhere else on their site. So like if someone comes to Kickstarter and searches for your project specifically, like that still shows as like Kickstarter drew them in. Kickstarter started sending, every time we launch a project, they send out an email to everybody who's ever backed any of our projects. And that brings in a lot of, but yeah, it's usually in the like kind of 60 to 80% range come from those Kickstarter links. And some of that, sometimes a lot of that, like if we get in a really good newsletter or front page placement, like that will be a higher number. But yeah, we're not necessarily driving a ton of traffic to Kickstarter ourselves, so we are doing our best to do that.
Yeah, and it's murky too, because in our case, what happens a lot is somebody will be new to us, but it's because they've bought our books in bookstores before and maybe haven't backed to Kickstarter before or haven't ordered on our website before. So we can't always tell the difference of if the discoverability happened on Kickstarter or if it was just like the dumb luck of that day that caused that chain of events.
Yeah, we've had a few books. We do need to be pretty strategic about which books we kickstart. Like, we've definitely had a few that have succeeded based on the author's network, and those ones, those backers don't tend to come back and back other projects of ours. Like we get a ton of new backers and we're really excited, and then we're like, wait a minute, they were supporting their friend. Or they like really just wanted this one specific thing. They're not interested in like the whole microcosm ethos. So we do a lot better, I think, on the strength of the concept of the project, and when we can kind of like develop assets that really fit well into Kickstarter's format, like tons of multimedia, really compelling visuals that pop, a short video that just like says what it needs to. Like these are all things that really help us, like they help people find it on Kickstarter, and they help us like put the Kickstarter in front of people that might not have gone there anyway. And it's, yeah, that's the thing that does the best.
Right. Yeah, like for example, when we did the Sea Shepherd cookbook, they sent one email from the organization and it funded the project within 1 hour. And then like we tripled our goal by the end because they sent a second email, and those people are probably not gonna back 90% of what we do after
Yeah,
that.
like if we followed that immediately with like another vegan cookbook or another sort of like environmental activist thing, I think more of them would have come back. But I forget what we followed it with, but it was probably like a book about punk music, and yeah.
Right.
I was gonna say statistically, it was probably a book by Dr. Faith.
Not back then, but yeah,
Yeah,
that was 10 years ago. Yeah. But yes, the same idea, right? And that's the other thing, like the Dr. Faith backers, like they would have some crossover with your audience, but maybe not necessarily the other way around.
Mhm.
But maybe.
Yeah, you never know. And there's always some, but it's like understanding that part of it. Like
Yeah.
her audience are creatives, which is cool.
Yeah, so a lot of the Kickstarters we develop are for repeat authors like Dr. Faith or Jessie. Like we'll kickstart every book that we do with you because people know your name, they know your work, you're really good at getting the word out. And they'll come back from your past Kickstarter projects and be like, another one by Jessie Kwak. And then we just kind of have to tailor it both towards people that are like experienced Jessie Kwak experts and like new to the Jessie Kwak universe and want to buy everything in that category. So yeah. And then
oh, go ahead.
oh, and then we like kind of always try to get some backlist from other authors into any of these projects just so people can kind of keep expanding their discovery. But yeah, usually people are pretty knowledgeable about what we have and what they want at this point.
And we've kind of skirted around it, but it's probably good to say it verbatim that most people that back a Kickstarter project don't do it because of wanting the book. They do it because of an emotional investment in the author or the project. And that's like a pretty important distinction because a lot of times, they just have like really strong, favorable feelings about somebody or even a certain topic. And that just, jams that button more than, oftentimes, I mean, I wonder like how many times people get the book and then just like feel good having the book, and then like how many people like get the book, immediately open it and read the book.
Well, I think it wasn't until like my 10th or 12th Kickstarter project that for the very first time I had somebody who was like an angry customer. Like literally the first time somebody had complained and been like, "Can I get my money back? This isn't what I expected it to be." And I was like kind of at first mortified for a minute, and then I was like, I think this is cause for celebration because I reached outside my bubble for the first time. Like I reached
Yeah.
somebody who just sees my book as like an object they wanted to purchase, not as like a thing they wanted to be a part of. So yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of,
Oh,
so I just rushed in the door today, so I haven't opened this. But I
Oh.
have a
We're gonna
package
get
from
an
Microcosm. We'll
unboxing.
do a quick unboxing.
let's see if it's good.
Wait, does it have a
How,
heart drawn on the package?
how did we do?
Well, you used plenty of tape.
Good work. Good work, warehouse.
Oh, you've trained them well.
I did. Mm.
And yeah, I'm sure this is from a Kickstarter, but I don't even remember what it is.
Oh, nice.
I think I
Oh,
know what it is because our customer service person recognized your name and was like, "Should I do anything special to this package?"
Oh,
more bikes in space.
nice.
Bikes in
Mhm.
space. Yay. Thanks for getting that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome.
That's and well, yeah, that's a good example because it's like for those, there's so many contributors that oftentimes they're like really, they feel very proud that they have a thing. So they're enthusiastic to push even though it's an anthology and they are but one of 11 or whatever contributors, they feel like it's their book, and so they're really excited and proud to like tell their network that like they have a story in this book.
I love
And
that.
that's, yeah, I mean, and that's like great advice, that doesn't always work. So like you really have to develop and edit and nurture something in a way that like people feel ownership of it from, beginning to execution of the project. And that can be hard for, to also make a book that like can stand on its own 2 feet.
Mhm.
I just want to call out the Trapper Keeper vibes of that cover, which
Yes, we'll show it again. I love this. These colors are so good.
Yeah, we worked. The artist is Albanian, and and when I said that, I was like, "Oh, that it's like a trapper keeper," and she was like, "I don't know what you're talking about." Even
You're
though,
like,
like,
well, everyone loves them, so good job.
it's like in the American '80s, they were quite the rage.
Oh.
But yeah,
Well,
that's yeah. I'm sorry. But I was gonna say we just did a book, Mostly True, that just came out, and that was another one where like it's like one part the fans' investment in this like 40 years of research that the author did, and then it's like one part like they actually collect, this is the third edition of the book, and they will like shelve them all, and they have to own them even though they own the other two. And that's like a really fascinating thing where it took maybe several years to get that book finished, but people were like still stoked when it was printed and shipped.
awesome. Well, I wanted to wrap up by asking you both, what are you excited about in like the future of publishing?
I have a million things to say. You want to go first, Ellie? Or do you want me to go
um
first?
well, we made some software that is pretty exciting. That's probably on both of our list. It's called Working Lit, and it's for publishers to do like title management and accounting and pay royalties. And right now it's in beta. It's free if you have fewer than 10 titles. Anyone who wants to try it out can sign up at workinglit.com. Um, I'm excited about it existing. I'm less excited to be like a software developer executive. This has never been a goal in my life, and it's a whole, yeah, I don't know, it's a whole different it's like having another difficult job instead of being part of this job of being a book publisher. But I'm really excited for people to use it and to partner with people on it.
Right. And we're building that into like a publisher cooperative so that the publishers that use it are also the owners of it. And then build out features accordingly. And it does, and anything other than literally laying out books, it does. So it's everything from like title management to royalty management to print management to sales and marketing to, everything that you would possibly ever need to do with books other than writing them or preparing them for print. And that's, I guess part of it is like when we were the #1 fastest growing publisher 2 years ago, like, I don't know, I guess in many ways, like that kind of closed the book because it felt like something that I felt like I could never possibly accomplish. And after that point, like I've really focused more on like changing the industry because, something like we're not interested in Microcosm being acquired or anything like that. Like we are set up that our employees will own the company and inherit the reins, and that's all like, taken care of already. So now like I'm much more focused on like how we can equip other people to have the sort of successes that we've had. And so that was a major reason that we made Working Lit so that other people can do that, because for a lot of them they're dependent on like the corporate savior or other things, or they're like operating on their fears rather than their ambitions. And so we wanted to build out the possibility that, they would just have one more tool. And, and honestly, it's the tool that made us successful. So if it worked for us and, we had no background or knowledge or anything and we were this successful, then like imagine what people that, know more than we do could achieve. And so, and then we have a weekly podcast called A People's Guide to Publishing, where that Elly and I do. And on the same name, we have a new edition coming out of A People's Guide to Publishing, the book, in 2026 for our 30th anniversary, which is kind of an
Wow.
incredible sentence to say.
Man, congratulations. Are you doing anything else to celebrate that? I hope.
Sleeping.
Yeah. Good time for parties, but definitely, yeah, putting out that book, that'll be a party in itself.
Yes. For a certain, we've had parties and it was always fascinating because what would happen is people would come and then they would sit in the corners and read. And we were like, this is very relatable.
I love a reading party. That's fun. Awesome. Well, thank you both so much. I really appreciate you taking the time today to talk to me and share your story. And I don't know, there's so much anxiety and negativity in the publishing industry right now. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to speak to you both, because you're always so positive and seeing the upsides to things and living that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There's more opportunity now than ever. And I honestly believe that. And it's sometimes that's not always able to be seen, but it's because you're like looking in the wrong places,
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you both very much. I appreciate it.
Take care.